All right, here we go. First video looking at the roster for my 2025 Fantasy Tour de France team. I'll talk a little bit more about this roster at the end of the video. These are just some spoilers for you to look at while I go through the rest of the riders. But before I do that, I want to talk about some overall thoughts on this year's fantasy game and some general strategies that you should employ. And the first thing I'm going to say here is just there's some homework that I would give you, required viewing, so to speak. I put together a series of 4 videos last year where I went pretty deep on how to play the fantasy game, some basic strategies, and then some more advanced strategies, things that you should be thinking about. And those videos are still relevant. I made them to be agnostic to the specific year, so long as no major rules changes are made, which this year there are no major rules changes that I'm aware of. So definitely go look at those videos first. I recommend that as a good baseline knowledge building exercise before we go into details for this year's strategies. Also, spoiler alert, this year's game is wide open. I think the organizers have done a fantastic job of pricing the riders such that there are no, to my knowledge, no clear slam dunk picks. Not even Tadej Pogacar. I mean, I'm still going to pick him, but that's a decision. I have to actually think about that, especially given the profile of the first week of this year's tour. But going through the list, there's really not that many riders that I can point to and say, yeah, these guys are really undercosted. You should pick them up. What I will be saying is, if you're going to pick up a 12 cost rider or a 9 cost rider or whatever, these are the names that stand out to me as the ones you should be considering. Not necessarily this rider is so undercosted that you would be a fool to not pick them up. So that's different. This is the first year that I haven't found anyone like that. Last year, famously, I identified Jonas Abrahamsen as falling into that category, and then I was too afraid to put him on my team. But he ended up being the most efficient rider, I think, in the history of the fantasy game last year. Um, the other thing I'll say here is that you really have to do your own research. This video is not going to tell you what to do. There's a bit of a philosophical discussion about whether strategy videos for games like this should be focused on telling the audience how to do their own research versus I've done the research already and here's what I found for you. And definitely this is going to fall more towards the former and less towards the latter, but I am still going to tell you my thoughts on the key writers. Um, as for doing your own research, I highly recommend that as you're putting together your team in the next few days here, for any rider that you are considering adding to your team, go do a Google search. Search their name and go to the news tab and search for recent news articles that mention that rider. Find out, are they sick? Did they just crash 2 weeks ago? Did they just go into the media and say that they're going to be solely working in support of their leader in this tour? Whatever it may be. There's really genuinely good information to be found in interviews. Also, you got to understand their team composition and what role they have on their team. I mean, really obvious example here is there's some riders that on their own merits are quite undercosted that you might think, wow, this rider would deserve a higher rating based on their strength as a rider, but they're part of a dedicated lead out train for a better sprinter. And those sort of riders, they just don't score that many points. So you really want to be cautious, especially with so many sprint stages and punchy sprint stages in the first week. If you're going to be picking up a versatile middle cost sprinter, you want to be damn sure that they're not going to be, you know, peeling off with 800K to go and letting their sprint train continue on without them. Similarly, if there's a climber that has no big GC leader that they're working in support of, they're likely to have much more freedom to go in breaks for their own results rather than just as a satellite rider, and then maybe even go for polka dots if they fall out of GC themselves, and that sort of thing. You can't expect from the get go from some of the best climbers in the world that are here to be domestiques. Matteo Jorgensen, Sepp Kuss, Yao Almeida, Like these guys are some of the best climbers in the world, but I'm just not going to pick them up at the beginning until I see that there's a really good reason for me to trust that they're going to be a high point scorer. And thankfully, we have a lot of time to figure that out because the first week is so sprint heavy. Also, go read the team roster announcements. It's usually just a one-page article on the trade team's website where they lay out who is their Tour de France team and what are their objectives. And this is a lot of just marketing, bullshit, but sometimes there's really useful information in there. Sometimes the sports directors will literally say, so and so is here to support Groenewegen in the sprints, or so and so is going to have their own chances on the harder stages. Like they'll literally say what the riders are here for. And it sounds obvious, but you got to just go to the main primary source, the team themselves. Finally, definitely go check on their recent results and also their past Grand Tour performances on PCS. You want to be looking out for how many little red badges they have indicating that they were in a breakaway, especially a long breakaway. Riders that have been doing well, or at least have been in a lot of breakaways this year, are extra valuable given the breakaway points that are a part of this game now. It's also just good to know what's their world ranking and their PCS ranking. So as a tiebreaker, if you're looking at 2 5-cost riders, you don't know much about either. It's probably not going to be a very consequential decision. Might as well just go for the rider that's, has a better world ranking. And also, it's just good to know whether the riders you're picking up have more success on hills, sprints, TTs, et cetera. It's just good to know that so that you can time when you're going to be picking them up and dropping them, et cetera. All right, so going into some strategies. First, I just want to look at the profile of stages for this year's tour. So this year we have 7, in theory, flat sprints. It may be less. There's 1 or 2 of these flat stages that look like they're likely to go to a break, or maybe even the punchy guys. 7 hilly stages, so that's a fair amount, and definitely the first week, which is a long week because of the holiday. They wanted to make sure that Monday the 14th, which is Bastille Day in France, fell on a big mountain stage. So the first week is 10 stages before there's the first rest day. And in this first week, there's a bunch of sprints and hilly stages. And so that's really going to influence what your team makeup should look like at the start of this tour. And, a big disclosure here, the advice I'm going to be giving in this video is for how to build your initial team, not necessarily how to change your team throughout. I'm hoping to make more videos sporadically throughout the tour to give advice on that topic. But generally speaking here, this prevalence of flat and hilly stages makes our decisions, it just narrows the number of possible choices we have. You're not going to be filling your team up with climbers and question how many climbers versus how many sprinters. You're just going to fully weight it to the other direction towards the punchier riders and the sprinters at the start. But just to continue my thought, there's 6 mountain stages, 1 mountain ITT, 1 flat ITT, which comes early in the first week, and the final sprint stage, which is normally a bit of pageantry before, essentially a criterium around the Champs-Élysées. It has some climbs in it. So probably it's still a flat sprint, but that one potentially could be one of these in-between stages. So like I said, the obvious strategy here is, fill your team up with sprinters and punchy riders and potentially some GC riders that you think are going to be picking up yellow or white jerseys on the stage 5 time trial. And then just be prepared to pick up a bunch of climbers and GC guys for the second half of the tour. And frankly, this makes our decisions a lot easier because by the time where we're going to be really agonizing over which, middle cost climber should I pick up or which GC rider do I need to pick up in addition to Pogacar? Well, at that point, we'll already have 9 stages of data. And sure, they're not mountain stages, but we'll be able to see who's struggling. We'll be able to see who got dropped in the echelons on a windy day and lost 5 minutes and is out of GC. We'll be able to see who crashed. I mean, my guess is that Roglic makes it to stage 8 or 9 before he crashes out. But we're going to have all that information going into the first mountain stage, which really allows us to kick the can down the road in terms of picking climbers and picking which super domestiques maybe just barely are worth it to pick up on our team, and then which of the riders classified as leaders do we want to have on our team. So we got plenty of time to figure that out. And now the tough decisions are just how many sprinters versus how many punchy people do you want on your team? Who within each team is going to get priority when you have, Matthew Van Der Poel and Jasper Philipsen on the same team? This could potentially be a year that Matthew Van Der Poel takes away green, but he's on the same team and is part of the lead out for one of the best sprinters in the world. So, like, those are the tough decisions we have to make, not necessarily who's the best climber. Um, so I mentioned already there's one exception, which is GC riders that you think can put themselves in a position to take jerseys, or at least put themselves high up in the jersey competitions on stage 5. Really the person I'm talking about here is Remco. Remco Evenepoel could very likely take yellow and white on stage 5, in which case he would likely hold it for the next 4 or 5 stages. So he's one of the exceptions to that rule, where he might be more valuable than an equivalently costed sprinter. I personally don't think so right at the moment, but I might change my mind on that before the final rosters are locked in. And of course, you should be thinking about your potential trades. I don't really think you can plan specific trades all the way out to stage 10, but definitely when you build your initial roster, if you assume the best, that everyone on your team is doing pretty well, you should have already planned out who you're going to be dropping or picking up after stage 4, before stage 5 for this individual time trial. It might be no one, or it might be, all right, I'm going to drop Wout van Aert at 19 stars, and I'm going to pick up Remco Evenepoel at 21 stars. So I need to make sure that I have 2 stars in reserve. And if, jumping back to my team, you can see that at the moment I have 3 stars in reserve. So if I want to, I can trade out Wout van Aert for any of the 22 cost sprinters, or Remco Evenepoel, who's at 21 stars. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back here. The one other thing I just want to mention here is regarding breakaway points. So there's 2, I think, very different approaches to breakaways for these pure flat stages versus the hilly stages. On the flat stages, we have, I don't know, 15 of the top 20 sprinters in the world here at the Tour de France. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly we have the 3 best sprinters. So there are big, powerful teams that are motivated to make sure that these flat stages are sprints, especially day 1, where the yellow jersey is on offer for a sprinter who might never have that opportunity in their career again. So you can be pretty damn sure that the breakaway is not going to win stage 1. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that most of the teams that are trying to contest, big objectives in the Tour are not going to waste a whole lot of energy out in that break. And so it's going to be, the French Pro Tour pro teams that are sending 1 or 2 sacrificial lambs into the breakaway just to get TV exposure. That's a little bit less of a thing these days than it was, 5 or 10 years ago. But it's still a thing. There's going to be someone in the break, especially because on day 1, if you snag up those polka dot jersey points, you get to wear the polka dot jersey the next day. So I expect relatively smaller and longer breakaways on all these flat stages. So that means even though the break's not going to win, those cheap riders that are probably not going to get a whole lot of real results in the Tour, they could be earning a lot of points on these flat stages, where they might be just in a breakaway for 200 kilometers or almost 200 kilometers and get 200 points, which is equivalent to winning the stage. So that's one scenario. On the hilly stages, it's entirely different. And it's really a lot harder to predict, but I expect some pretty damn big breakaways on these hilly stages. There's going to be a lot of people that are really trying to not go to the finish with, Jasper Philipsen. There's also going to be people who want to get enough of a buffer so that when Matthew Van Der Poel attacks across in the finish, they're already ahead in that group and can maybe hang on to his wheel. So I expect pretty big breakaways, and this is where you're going to want to pick the stronger riders. And these are people who maybe aren't going to be winning stages, but they're still really valuable in the fantasy game. Someone who is a punchy rider like Gregoire or Nielsen Paulus, maybe. I'm not sold that he's the costed correctly for this for you to pick them up. But someone like Powless is going to be really motivated to be breakaways on these hilly stages. So, looking back at my tentative roster here, I've mentioned this in the past, but there's a couple different approaches that you can take. Just to look at either ends of the spectrum, you can have what I call the 5+3 strategy, where you have five big, well-known riders, and then you have three cheap riders, riders that potentially are at literally the minimum cost of 5 stars or maybe 7 stars, and you're just hoping that they earn some points. Um, well, their real role on your team is to free up enough stars for you to buy five big marquee riders. We learned last year that that strategy is very unlikely to win you the overall fantasy league because it's so important that, first of all, you guess the breakaway riders correctly. You guess who's going to have a lot of success in the breakaways, especially on day one and day two. You got to guess those people. The winner of most of the leaders of the fantasy league last year correctly picked up Jonas Abrahamsen and Frank Vandenbroek, who scored tons and tons of points on stage one, and they had them from the start. So you got to guess correctly, but then also you want to make sure you have 8 people on your team that are earning points reliably. You cannot afford any longer to have only 5 people that are earning the majority of your points and then 3 duds. You really want to get to a point where all 8 riders are earning points. Now, the problem here, and the reason why I'm not necessarily taking my own advice, is a bit of a psychological thing and also just my objectives. I'm not trying to win the overall global league. I just recognize that with the way breakaway points right now work, it's just such a big lottery. I instead want to give myself the most agency to make meaningful decisions and react as we learn which riders are doing well. So am I going to get first place because I correctly picked the rider before they had a breakout day? No. But am I going to have the flexibility to pick them up on my team immediately the day after? Yes. And one of the things that I'm talking about specifically here is by having a little bit of excess star budget, it allows you to spend one trade to pick someone up instead of two. I already mentioned it, but for example, if Wout van Aert crashes on day one, and I want to pick up another sprinter, I want to pick up Merlier or Philipsen that cost 22 stars. If I was already at my salary cap, I would have to sell Wout van Aert and Verchet, or maybe Abrahamsen. I'd have to sell 2 people just to sort of pull my stars into one more expensive rider and one less expensive rider. Well, by having a bit of a excess here, you can just spend one of your trades. I could just sell Wout van Aert and pick up a more expensive rider. And in order to do things like that, I've found that I enjoy taking the 5+3 strategy of just 3 very cheap, perhaps minimum cost riders, and lots of flexibility to pick and choose the top 5 big riders based on who's doing well at any point in the tour. And you can see I've done a little bit of an in-between here where I'm still spending some stars on someone more expensive than the minimum cost in Verchet, and I'm not picking up like a huge rider with Abrahamsen. I'm just going for a mid-cost rider. So this is somewhere in between. And I recommend that most people just find the middle ground between those two extreme strategies of 8 middling to high cost riders that are all going to be potentially scoring a lot of points versus 5 and 3, and find what is your tolerance for risk in this game. Are you trying to win? Are you trying to just beat your friend or your mom or your dad? Or are you trying to win a very large league where you're going to need to get lucky? Well, in the latter scenario, you just want to take a more risky strategy. So this is something I talk about a lot in my strategy guide videos. So take a look at those for more information. All right, let's move on to the riders. I want to go through the riders one at a time. Well, at least at the start, one at a time, to just talk about the riders that stand out to me as being interesting. Usually that's because they should be on your radar to potentially put them on your team. In a few cases, it's because I really want to steer you away from those riders. But really, what I'm going to be talking about here is not necessarily who you should have on your team, but which riders you should consider if your roster strategy demands a middle cost climber or a high cost sprinter or a low cost all rounder, whatever. You want to just have a smaller list of riders to look at. And I think that I can give you a little bit of advice in terms of which names stand out to me given their cost. One big disclaimer here is that this is only my evaluation of good riders to pick up at the start of the tour on day one. Everything is going to change in week two, and things might change entirely for day two. But this is advice for who you should be looking at for your starting roster. Oh, and one other caveat here: there's one rider missing from this list, Michael Valgren. He's just not yet up on the fantasy site, so I don't know what he's going to cost. I don't expect that he's going to be crazy undercosted. I mean, if he's 5 stars, he's probably a good pickup, but beyond that, I don't think he's going to be a big factor here. But just want to call that out. There is one rider missing. Everyone else on here, though, you can see has been confirmed by their team as making the final roster. Oh, and just one quick note here. This column, as you're following along, this column right here just indicates whether or not a rider is eligible for the white jersey. So that obviously has a big factor in determining their value as a rider. All right, so let's start at the top. Tadej Pogačar. It is not at all obvious that Tadej Pogačar is a good pickup for day one. Definitely everyone will have Tadej on their team for stage 10. I would guess, the majority of teams will have them on their roster for stage 5 even. But it's not super clear that in these first 4 stages, he's going to be earning a lot of points. In theory, he doesn't need to. There's not a whole lot that he can gain, and there's a lot he can lose by playing it very aggressively in these first stages. But I think he just wants it too bad. I think he wants to win as many stages as possible. He wants to establish his legacy. His whole team is built around supporting him. He doesn't really have anyone that he's competing with. I don't buy that, Narvaez is going to be the team leader on these hilly stages. I just don't buy it. If anything's going to happen with UAE, Pogačar is going to attack. And I think that he can, earn some cheeky points and maybe even win some of these hilly stages. It just depends on his motivation. Now, that's, again, he doesn't need to do that. That's not a key strategy for him winning the yellow jersey. But I think he will probably employ it, which is why I've decided to put him on my team. But it's not at all clear that everyone should have him. In fact, if you free up 27 stars on day one, you can pick up not only an extra big sprinter, but you can also pick up a middle cost rider instead of a min cost rider, which is huge. Like especially when we're talking about these breakaways that are going to potentially go for 200K. You have a lot of advantages by not having Pogačar on your team. The disadvantage being, obviously, you need to spend a trade to pick him up later. And by putting him on my team at the start of the tour, I don't have to spend a trade, which is 50 credits in the fantasy game, to pick him up later. He's already on the team. Enough said about that. Let's move on. So 24 stars. Jonas Vingegaard. He is really not a good pickup. Avoid him. Maybe this is obvious, but he's not historically the best point scorer. Even in years that he wins the Tour de France, he doesn't always score more than Tadej Pogačar. He just doesn't win as many stages, and this first week is not for him. He just wants to stay upright, stay towards the front of the race. He's not going to be earning a lot of points in this first week. Maybe he'll do well in the TT. I think we can expect that, but I don't think he's going to win. I don't think he's going to take yellow, so avoid Jonas. Let me just zoom in a little bit for you guys so you can see this list a little better. All right, there you go. All right, so the next step down is 22 cost riders. So first, let's talk about the big 3. So I'm sure all the commentators on the internet are talking about these big 3 sprinters. These are the 3 best sprinters in the world right now, pretty undisputedly. Coy is probably the 4th, but he's not here. So they're all costed the same. They're all in the top 3. No one knows the exact order of who's the best. And they have slightly different situations. So first of all, Tim Merlier has probably the best track record this year for results. He's just won handily and shown himself when he's put in the right spot, and even when he's not put in the right spot, he's just the strongest, fastest rider. Not by a lot, but he's the strongest. But he's only here with one person supporting him. Bert van Leeberger is his lead-out guy. The rest of the team for Soudal Quickstep is working in support of Remco Evenepoel. So, of course, they've got some rouleurs who are going to be able to double dip and support both of them. But Tim doesn't have a big team. He's going to have to surf wheels. Jasper Philipsen has a fantastic team. And potentially two of the best non-lead sprinters as lead-out riders, Caden Groves and Matthew Vanderpool. If both of those two guys are his second and third last man, or last man and second last man, I mean, he can pretty reliably be put in a great position. Two problems. First of all, he hasn't been the fastest once he actually is put into position of these three. He's probably been the third out of the three in terms of pure speed this year. Last year was a different story, but this year he's probably third in that list. The other problem is that he's competing with Matthew Vanderpool for stages, meaning not every stage is going to be a Jasper Philipsen stage. Alpecin de Koenig is very certainly going to be working as a whole team in support of Matthew Vanderpool on some stages. And we just don't know exactly what that dynamic is going to be. Also, the fact that Caden Groves is here, does that mean that they want one more super sprinter lead out man for Jasper Philipsen, or does that mean they're hedging their bets because they don't think Jasper's on good form? I really don't know. So I've got a lot of doubts about Jasper. He's not my top pick of these three. Now, Milan is, first of all, eligible for the white jersey. So if he wins stage one, he picks up the white jersey, that's 30 extra points and 30 points every day that he holds it. So that's a bit of a tiebreaker right there. But then also, Lidl Trek has a crazy strong team that's working fully in support of Milan. The only person that might be fighting for Milan in terms of team leadership on certain stages is Thibaut Nice, and he's been sick and crashed recently. And he also, just the way he rides, he doesn't necessarily, on the stages where he's going to take opportunities, he doesn't need the full team supporting him. So Milan, I think, is going to have the most agency and support of all three of these. So that, coupled with the fact that he's eligible for the white jersey, was the tiebreaker for me. But really, you could not be faulted by picking any of these three. And I think that a big, luck factor, even in conservative strategies, is going to be just which one or two of these guys did you pick up at the start. Now, the only other 22 cost rider is Matthew Vanderpool. I've mentioned him already. Now, historically, he is one of the worst picks for the Fantasy Tour de France game ever. Like, one of the worst picks ever, because he's costed so high because he's a famous, powerful, successful rider. The problem is that usually the Tour de France is not a big objective for him. I am guessing that is different this year. First of all, we're going back to the Mur de Bretagne, where he won in honor of his grandfather back in 2021, I think it was. That's stage 6, I think we go there. So he's got a home turf advantage on that climb. But I just think the profile is such that someone like Matthew Vanderpool could easily win the green jersey ahead of all these big sprinters if he had the full support of his team to be going for points every day. There's just too many stages where he can earn a lot of points. And I think if you follow the Lantern Rouge cycling podcast, they've mentioned it. There's a lot of hilly stages that are classified as a tier 1 or tier 2 or category 1 or category 2 stage, which means they still offer the full 50 points towards the green jersey at the end of the stage, even though it's not a flat sprint stage. So there's too many things that are aligning for this to be the year for Matthew Vanderpool, not to mention the incredible form that he's shown. He was in great form at the Criterium de Dauphiné. It's a gamble because history says you should never pick up Matthew Vanderpool, and every time I've done it, I've been disappointed. But this year, I think, is the year, and I do recommend that people pick him up. 21 stars. There's only one person in this category, and it's Remco, and it's I think a little bit of a question of strategy more than a question of rider strength, because if you want to pick up a leader who is not Tadej Pogacar from the start, Remco should be your pick. He's eligible for the white jersey. He's a classics rider that has won Liège twice and, Olympics, World Championship. He can, if the situation arises, he can capitalize and win some of these hilly stages. You can't say that about most of the other leaders. Also, he's the best time trialist in the world right now and is very likely to be in a position to pick up yellow and white on stage 5. So Remco is the only other big leader that I would recommend considering. I'm personally on the fence, but not quite there. I think I'd rather spend one of my few big cost riders on sprinters or people like Matthew Vanderpool or Wout van Aert. 20, there's only 2 riders, and first of all, don't pick up Primoz. He's not worth it. 20 this record. I think this is the one person that they got wrong, but unfortunately they didn't undercost him, they overcosted him. And I mean, in the velo games, I think his cost is like 8 stars or 10 stars or something crazy crazy low, because they realize he's likely not even the fourth best climber in this race, and that's if he survives the crazy hectic week one. And so he's going to crash, something's going to happen. I don't even think he's the best rider on his team. I think that Florian Lipowitz is more likely to do well and score points in this game rather than Primoz. So just don't pick him up. If you really 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 want to pick up Primoz Roglic, just instead pick up Florian Lipowitz. I don't recommend it, but I think it's strictly better. And then Yao Almeida represents something that I'm going to maybe mention a few times here, which is just the super domestiques and domestiques in general, big climbers on big teams. We are lucky that due to the parcours design of this race, they're likely to not be scoring big points until the end of week one, beginning week two. So we have time to figure out which ones are worth it. Now, you can say Yao Almeida is a good time trialist, so some of the same argument made for Remco could apply to him, but he's strictly worse, and he costs only 1 star less. And very few people are going to be capped on 3 liters at the start of the tour. So like, if you really want to pick up Yao, like just pick up Remco and find a way to make up that star cost. I don't think that anyone's going to be in a position where he's the best way to spend their points. Going down to 19, a few things to mention. First of all, Biniam Girmay, he had a breakout year last year. He won the green jersey 3 stages. He was up there in a bunch of other stages. We haven't not seen that Biniam Girmay this year. He just hasn't showed up to any races and done those sorts of performances. So with him being 4 stars more expensive this year, I'm not betting on it. In theory, this parcours should be good for him, but he just hasn't been that peak Biniam that we saw last year. So in my mind, it's just too much of a risk. If you're going to go for a sprinter who's not one of these big guys, you can get better sprinters for less stars than Biniam Girmay. Adam Yates, it's the same story as Yao Almeida. It's super domestique. We have time to figure out which ones of these are going to be worthwhile, because historically very few of them are, but sometimes they are, and we just have time to figure it out throughout this tour. We don't have to make that decision on day one, so avoid Adam Yates. Wout van Aert, now we're talking. All right. So hear me out. I don't think that Wout van Aert is objectively the best pickup. I recognize that I'm making an emotional decision by putting him on my team, at least for now. Someone might talk me out of it. A lot of people in the Discord channel have been trying to talk me out of it. Wout van Aert, he just always finds a way to score points. The only thing you have to worry about with Wout van Aert is if he's on good form and if he's going to try. Because when he's not on good form, he is still the world's best teammate, and he will save himself for those key stages where he needs to help his leader, Jonas Vingegaard. I mean, we saw him in the break many times in the Giro to support Simon Yates when it mattered, and that ended up being a huge factor in him winning the Giro this year. So, Wout, if he's not on good form, he's going to not contest the bunch sprints. He's not going to be going in those breakaways on non-mountain stages where he's not needed as a satellite rider. He's not going to be contesting those punchy stages. And that's the big risk, because he hasn't been on great form. He's supposedly sick. He skipped the Belgian National Championships, which is required. So there's some people saying he was faking sickness to not have to go. I don't buy that. He just hasn't been on his peak Wout van Aert form. But if we look at years past, and even just comparing him to Mathieu van der Poel, he's the kind of rider that if he has the motivation and the form, he can win on any parcours, and he can score points for the fantasy game in huge numbers on any parcours. And the biggest factor that I think makes me want to pick up Wout van Aert is that all of the same reasons why the parcours are favorable for Mathieu van der Poel, why this might be a year for him to get green, they also apply to Wout van Aert, except that Wout van Aert does not have any other sprinter on his team that he's competing with. If Wout wants to go for stage 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all 9 first stages of this tour, his team will support him, because all they really need from the other 7 riders on the team or 6 riders on the team is to keep Vingegaard safe. And you don't need to have your full team all day devoted to Vingegaard. You just need to have the team come together to surround him, to protect him, put him in position at key moments. And you can give support to Wout, and also Wout doesn't need that much support. You can just say, hey, the other six guys have Vingegaard protected. Wout, go do your thing. And if Wout's in good form, he's going to score a lot of points. So enough said about that. I like Wout a lot. Wout a lot. I'm going to pick him up. Probably. Maybe. I might change my mind. All right, 18. So I'm going to start moving a little bit quicker. I don't like any of these riders. They all, uh, the same reasoning that I gave previously about the leaders and climbers. We just don't need to pick them up. There's not a reason to pick them up now because they're not like Tade, where you're going to pick up this specific rider later, so you might as well pick them up now to save a trade. These guys are all unknown. We don't know who's going to crash, who's going to be going well. The one exception here is Filippo Ganna. If you're like a huge Filippo Ganna fan, and you think that he's going to be sprinting, which he occasionally does, but not all the time, yeah, maybe go for it. But I still would stay away from all the 18 cost riders. Moving on to 17, it's sort of the same deal. All of these riders that are 17 cost, I would avoid all of them. They're all, with the exception of Groenewegen and Groves, they're all just these, second class leaders and climbers and domestiques, and we can wait. We don't need to pick them up. Now, Groves, I already mentioned, I don't know what he's doing here. If he's here to win a bunch of stages, well, that means that either Mathieu van der Poel or Jasper Philipsen are sick or crashed because there's no way that the team can spread all of their stages evenly across the team. It just doesn't work. And so on the pure bunch sprints, they're going to go for Jasper, and on the hilly punchy stages, they're going to go for Mathieu. And I think Caden's just here to support them and be a lead out man. So I don't think he's the best way to spend 17 points. Dylan Groenewegen, I mean, you can make an argument for him. He did win a stage last year. What he is good at doing is when he comes to the tour, winning a stage. But on the stages that he doesn't win, he's not on the podium very often. He's like 5 kilometers back, or, in the gruppetto or whatever. Like, he's not consistent enough for me to want to spend 17 points on him. There's better sprinters for less cost. All right, let's look at 16. Speaking of better sprinters for less cost, in this 16 category, you got Jordi Meeus. And Jordi Meeus is, potentially one of those riders that might be what I would consider undercosted. I was expecting him to be a little bit more given his form and given that he's got an amazing team surrounding him. Red Bull has got very little mountain support for Lipowitz and Roglic, and almost everyone else on the team is sprint trained. So Meeus is going to be put in a good position. So he could be worth picking up. Also, Julian Alaphilippe, he's nowhere near his peak, but he's got a lot to prove. Back in the Tour de France, like getting Alaphilippe into the Tour de France was a part of the rules changes they made to allow additional invites, discretional invites for the race organizers. So it's a lot of attention on him as usual. And there's parkour that suits him. It's just, I don't think he's got the legs anymore. So you could consider him, but I'm not going to recommend him. No one else worth mentioning there. If we look at the 15 cost riders from here to there, a few worth mentioning. Kevin Vauquelin is actually one of the few riders that are classified as leader that I might consider picking up for the start of the tour. But in order for me to think that's worthwhile, I would need to see some data from an interview, from a team announcement. I need to see some hard facts that tell me that he's not here for GC. If he's here to shake things up, try to win a stage again like he won last year, try to get the polka dot jersey. If he's here to be active, I think he's one of the few leaders that could be scoring points in this first week. But I think he's not here to be active. He's here to be boring and, hang on to the peloton as long as he can until he drops on the mountain stages, and he'll come in, top 10 or 20 or whatever it is in GC. So he could be good, but I don't think he's going to be optimizing his fantasy points in this tour. Also 15, Jake Stewart and Phil Bauhaus. We're starting to get to that category of riders where if saving, from 22 stars to 15 stars, if saving those 7 stars perfectly unlocks you to make some other really big, purchase for somewhere else on your roster, these are the types of riders that you want to be looking to trade out those those big sprinters for, because they're probably not going to win as often as the big three. But the big three, there's three of them, so none of those three are going to be winning every day. We don't think, and so these second tier sprinters have, in some ways, a smaller gap between their value and the big three's value. So these are the kind of sprinters that you want to be looking at. Phil Bauhaus always is just there. He's always scoring some points here and there in the fantasy league. Every year I go back and I say, wow, Phil Bauhaus scored that many points. I didn't realize that, because he's just always top 10 in a sprint. So worth considering. And he can make it to many sprint finishes. There's also, we've got the punchy boys, Ben Healy and Nielsen Powless. Oof, if these guys were like 2 stars less, I would say they're really good pickups. Certainly later on, Healy can really climb. Powless can climb okay, but Healy can really climb. Later on in the tour, these guys might be making some big moves. The only way I really see this being worthwhile is if one of them gets into the break on stage one for some crazy reason, like Nielsen Powless did a few years ago, and they pick up polka dots and they're going to be in every break for the next 5 stages. These are the kind of guys that you want to be ready to pick up quickly if you see them doing well and holding some jerseys. But I don't think I'm going to pick them up ahead of the start. Tobias Holland Johannesson, he's in incredible form, and I think we are going to be looking at picking him up at some point. I just expect him to be in the top 5 consistently. But I'm just mentioning that because I think he's costed well at 15. But yeah, it's not the time of the tour to pick him up. Going on to 14 cost riders. So from here to here. All right. So most of these are not worth mentioning, but there's some more punchy boys that are potentially big point scorers in this first week, namely Thibaut Nice, Romain Gregoire, Magnus Cort. Of the three, I like Magnus Cort in terms of the type of rider he is, but he's a little bit old. He's a little past his prime. Like if Magnus Cort of 4 years ago, he might be a really good pickup at 14. Thibaut Nice is on the other side of his career and has been in pretty good form, but he crashed recently and he's also been sick. And with him being on the team with the biggest lead out and best lead out for Milan, I don't think that he will be in the break on those stages where someone like Magnus Cort might have the freedom to. Because what are they going to hold back Magnus Cort just so he can be there for Werenskold? No, they've got plenty of people supporting their main sprinter. Magnus Cort's going to have a bunch of freedom. Gregoire, I don't know. I'm hesitant to bet on this guy again, but he's the kind of rider that potentially could be earning a lot of points. So if you're looking at a 14 cost rider and you're really sold on these punchy boys, these are the three that I would be looking at. All right, 13 stars. Not too much to talk about here. I want to mention Jenno Berkmos. I'm gonna level with you guys. I don't know anything about this dude besides just what I've seen on PCS, but everyone seems to be talking about him. Everyone's talking about Berkmos. He's classified as a sprinter, so that might make him harder to fit onto your team, but he's also eligible for the white jersey. Everyone, can't be wrong, so it's worth considering. Do your research. If you're looking for a mid-cost sprinter, look at Jenno Berkmos. Narvaez, I just want to mention, I don't think he's worth picking up. On his merits at 13 stars, he's an incredibly strong rider. He pipped Pogacar in an uphill sprint on stage 1 of the Giro last year, took the pink jersey. He can win on a lot of stages here, but he's not going to, because his role is going to be to position Poggi and then do a big, crazy 2-minute lead out up one of these steep hills before Poggi attacks everyone else. So I don't think he's worth picking up. Sam Watson, I think he's been on form. He's also a young rider. I haven't done enough research on Sam Watson, but if you're looking for a mid-cost all-rounder, you might want to consider him. Personally, I think there's some better options just above and just below, so I haven't really been looking at the 13 cost. But Sam Watson is one of the names that stands out to me. I would skip Pavel Bittner because the rumor mill is that he's going to be lead out on Picnic. He's not going to be the main sprinter, so I'd probably skip him. Speaking of which, let's move down to 12 cost riders from here to here. Oh, a lot of 12 cost riders. So a few people I want to mention here. First is Case Bowl. Case Bowl is likely to be the main supported sprinter on Astana, and Astana really want to score points. And Case Bowl, when he's allowed to sprint for himself, when Mark Cavendish isn't on your team, he's always there. So he's been, I wouldn't say super consistent, but he's relatively often in the final of these big flat sprint stages. So he could be a good pickup. Um, Louis Barre, he's another rider that, frankly, I don't know much about Louis Barre, but everyone seems to be talking about him, and he's a young rider. If you're looking for a 12 cost all rounder, you should look into Barre a little bit more. Personally, I'm not super interested. Um, then there's a few more undercosted or medium costed sprinters. We've got Marin Vandenberg, we got Brian Coquard, and also Fred Wright, who's, this could be his breakout year. I'm always rooting for Fred Wright. Ever since 2021 or 2022, he was a 5 cost rider. He was a slam dunk. He almost won a stage twice, got second twice, I think, in that year, something like that. I'm always rooting for him. Just not quite sure that he's shown enough this year to make me think 12 is a steal for him. Oh, and just mentioning Arnold Demar, uh, don't be surprised. Don't be fooled. He's not a real sprinter anymore. He doesn't have it. I could be wrong. I'd love if I was wrong. I have fond memories of seeing him win in the big, red, white, and blue French national champion jersey, but he's past his prime. He's not winning. So I would avoid him. If you want a cheap sprinter, like pick up Marin Vandenberg instead of him at 12 stars. All right, moving down to 11 costs. There's a fair number of these. Can't fit on one page. I'm gonna have to talk about these and scroll down as we go. All right. So first person, Tobias Landen-Dressen. I mentioned. I think Pavel Bittner is going to be leading him out. At least that's what the rumor mill is saying. That's what was mentioned in an article I saw, and also on Landon Rue's cycling podcast. He's also eligible for the white jersey. So if he spikes a win on stage 1, he gets the white jersey as well. So I think he's one of the low cost sprinters that I'm closest to picking up on my team. I haven't done it yet. I decided to take Jonas Abrahamsen instead, but he was temporarily on my roster before I removed him. So definitely look at Tobias Landen-Dressen. I recommend him. Georg Zimmermann is on great form, just won the German national championships, but he's a climber. I'm mentioning him because I don't think that he does a whole lot to help Biniam Girmay, and the whole team's built around Biniam Girmay. So Zimmermann is very likely to have his own freedom in this tour. I just don't think that he's going to score enough points in week 1 to make him worth it. But definitely you should keep your eyes on him. Søren Werenskjold, I mentioned already. I think he's the main supported sprinter for X, and X has a strong team of dudes that can put him in a good spot. So also importantly, he's an all-rounder. He's classified as an all-rounder. So while I personally think that I would pick up Tobias Landen-Dressen over him, if you are already capped at 3 sprinters, Søren Werenskjold is a really good way to get a 4th sprinter on your team at 11 stars without breaking the rules, because you can only have 3 riders classified as a sprinter on your team. He's also a young rider eligible for the white jersey, which is a great bonus for these sprinters for stage 1. There's a few other people in this category. Frank Vandenbroek, Casper Asgreen, who else? Valentin Madouas. I really like these guys. I think they're a little bit more expensive than I personally am willing to pay for them, because they fall into that big, gigantic category of really strong riders who will probably be in some breaks, but you never know which ones are going to be in the breaks that stick. And so it's just such a risky move to be choosing. Like, you probably only can pick 1 or 2 of these types of riders on your team, and they might do literally nothing. You might have, let's say you take 2 of these guys, 22 stars that are literally doing nothing at all for you, and it's too much of a risk for me. But it's worth mentioning, Frank Vandenbroek was the biggest scorer on day 1 of last year's tour, and because of the position it put him in the jersey competitions and some other activity that he was a part of, he ended up being one of the most efficient point scorers for the entire tour. And that early success really carried over. But he was costed, I think, 7 stars last year. Now he's 11. So he's not a slam dunk for me. But definitely these are 3 guys that I'm maybe going to take Matawis into out of that category. But definitely Asgreen and Vandenbroek are proven stage winners. Even though Frank didn't technically win, he gave the win to Roman Bardet. They're proven stage winners, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them in a lot of breaks. All right, moving on. 10 cost riders. So in this category from here to here, uh, there's only a few guys I want to mention. First is Ivan Romeo. I like this dude. He's in great form. He's, you know, versatile. He can climb. He's got a lot of different ways that he can score points. I am guessing, if I'm just making a prediction, he will be on my team at some point in this Tour de France. Just not right now. He's got to, get lucky in some breaks, pick up the white jersey, whatever, or we could just have to get to the mountains where there's going to be, the type, more of the type of breaks that I expect him to be in. He's a strong rider, and he's not going to waste it on a breakaway on a flat sprint stage where that's just a TV time breakaway. He's not going to waste his efforts there. Enough said. I like that guy a lot, but I'm not going to pick him up at the start. Anthony Turgis was one of the most efficient riders last year. He cost 9 stars last year, and I'm not sure. I have to look at the Total Energies team one more time, but I don't think he's their supported sprinter. But he is another one of these riders that's classified as an all-rounder, but is really a sprinter. Last year he was classified as a sprinter, and he scored a bunch of points. He was in some breakaways, and he was also contesting some sprints. I think he got 5th place maybe in one of the stages. So he's someone worth considering. Personally, I think there's better options, but he should be on your short list. And then finally, we come to my boy, the GOAT, Jonas Abrahamsen. This year, he's 10 stars instead of 7 stars. And importantly, he broke his collarbone like 9 days ago or something crazy. So it would have been my recommendation to everyone to put Jonas on your team had he not crashed. He crashed. Was very disappointed. He was out of the tour, but then only a few days later, like I think it was 2 days later, he was posting on Instagram videos him back on the trainer. And then his team announced a couple days later that he had miraculously healed as if he was a 12-year-old. That's what the doctor said. It's as if he was a 12-year-old. And yeah, he's going. He's going to the tour. So I think he had a really good experience with the success and the attention he generated, not just for him, but for his team last year in those breakaways all the time, wearing the polka dot jersey for like half the tour. And I think he's got a lot to prove this year coming back from this silly little injury that he had 2 weeks ago. So I think he's hungry. He's been posting a lot on Instagram. I don't follow all the riders on Instagram, but I follow this dude, and I know he's got a team behind him, but I think he's hungry. He's motivated. I think we're going to see him in the breakaway on day 1. And if not day 1, day 2. And if we don't, we should sell him right away because it means that his collarbone is still holding him back. So, sad story there. But at the moment, I have him on my team. I'm going to keep him on my team until I change my mind. I might be convinced by wiser people than myself to sell him. All right, going down to 9 stars. I'm going to save you a bunch of time. I don't like anyone at 9 stars. Maybe Brent Van Moor. He's a good rider, but I don't think he's the best way to spend your points. And frankly, if you're considering any of these 9 cost riders, I think you should instead just pick up a 7 cost rider and save those 2 stars and spend them in better ways, because you can make a big difference going from a 17 to a 19 or a 19 to a 21 or 20 to 22, whatever. And the difference between a 7 and a 9 here is in the first week is not going to be big. So I wouldn't recommend any 9 cost riders. Also, there's only a few of them, but I don't recommend any of the 8 cost riders. I don't see any of these guys, being worthwhile. Bergadeau, there's a little bit of sentimental attachment to Bergadeau. What do they call him on the Lantern Rouge cycling podcast? The B-Tech Alaphilippe, especially when he had that goatee a few years ago. He scores a few points every year, but I only really consider him when he's minimum cost, and at 8 stars, I just go for someone cheaper. So now the last category, there's really not that many of 7, 6, and 5 cost riders. And I am hoping to do a deeper dive into all these riders because, frankly, these riders are, I wouldn't give them as much thought 2 years ago. But after the introduction of the breakaway points rule last year, these cheap riders end up having a huge effect on your team. And if you're like me and you want to take a conservative approach and go with the 5 plus 3, 5 big guys and 3 cheap guys, you got to pick 3 of these guys. And some of them might be scoring 1,000 points over the course of the tour because they're in a bunch of breakaways and they get an early polka dot jersey and they hold it for a few days and that snowballs. And others will literally score 0 points, 0 points at all. And that is for a decision point that isn't really a key part of your team. Your main decision point is which big riders to pick. This just has an outsized impact relative to, if we were looking at these guys from the perspective of real world tour results as opposed to fantasy tour points. So your choice of cheap riders actually matters a lot. And I'm going to do a deep dive a little bit later, but I'm just going to mention a few people that stand out. I like Alexis Renard. He's undercosted. He can sprint. He can be in breaks. He's gonna, he's gonna be at the front of the group in a lot of reduced groups if he's there. So, is he a great rider? No, but we're looking at people that are at the bottom for a reason. So he's one that stands out to me. I also like Gachenard and Verchet. I like Verchet a little bit more. I like these guys specifically because they are young riders that are cheap on a French World Tour or Pro Tour team, pro team. Total Energies is one of the few teams that I'm expecting to be in a lot of these TV breaks. And of the two, I think I like Verchet more. I don't know that much about him, but he's ranked 205 on world ranking on PCS, and he's also a better climber. Gachenard, I picked him up at one point last year, or maybe I don't remember if I picked him up, but I recommended him last year. But I gave the caveat that the only reason I was recommending him was because Benji Nasson from the Lantern Rouge Cycling Podcast said he thought he would be in 7 breakaways. Well, spoiler alert, he was not in 7 breakaways. I think he was in 1 or 2, but yeah, he wasn't a big point scorer last year, and he only cost 6 stars, I think, last year. Anders Holland Johannesson, I think the lesser of the two Holland Johannessens, but he only costs 7 stars. So I don't think you want to pick him up early because I think of the UnoX boys, he's not the most likely to be sent out into the break all day in the first week. But I would not be surprised if everyone is picking this guy up when we get to the mountains because at 7 stars, I mean, he could be up there with the best climbers in these breaks. Not a sure thing, but it might happen. No one at 6 stars appeals to me. Sorry, Bert. You're just the lead out man. These 5-star riders, you can see we have almost no choices. There's only 4. I have 2 of these guys on my team already. I don't like any of them. I don't think any of them are going to be big point scorers. We're talking like lead out men here. The only person that I'm pretty certain I'll have on my team is Sebastian Grignard, because he's classified as a climber. And if we go back to my team, you can see I'm already capped at 5 all-rounders. So I cannot fit one more all-rounder on my team. And that's because at the moment I have both Van der Poel and Van Aert. And these middle guys are quite often all-rounders. So I like Grignard just because he frees me up to be able to pick up one of these other all-rounders. Yeah, so that's all I've got for these rider evaluations. Jumping back to my team, I think I covered all the main points. Just a big caveat here. I'll do another video before I post my final team. This is not my final team, but this represents my current thinking for how I want to approach this fantasy game. If you are trying to get lucky and spike the win of the global league, or if you have the patience and risk tolerance to create a bunch of accounts and create 10 different teams and manage all those email addresses to maintain all 10 teams throughout the tour, then I would recommend you take a very different strategy from me, and I'd recommend that you pick up a couple 7 cost riders, a couple mid, low teen cost riders, and you fill out a team of 8 guys, and probably not pick up the big three, any of the big three sprinters, because Milan is certainly going to be earning some points, but is he going to be earning the most points per star? No, almost certainly not, because he's competing against the 2 other best sprinters in the world. So I would definitely not recommend picking up the big 3 sprinters if you're trying to just get lucky and spike to win, because I think those points are better spent on a higher number of sprinters. You want to have like 5 sprinters on your team for this first week, 3 literal classified sprinters, and then 2 semi-sprinters that are classified as all-rounders. I still do think that Mathieu van der Poel is the right pickup if you're trying to win the global league, because I think already stage 2 he's going to potentially win it. But that's my advice to you. Stay tuned for some more videos, in particular a video breaking down these low-cost riders. And if I don't get around to a video, I'll at least be posting some more details in my spreadsheet linked into the Discord channel that you can find linked at the bottom of this video description. All right, if you stuck with me through all of this ranting, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a new channel, so if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. And with that, I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video. Take care.